So my name's Hughie Brown. I am the program lead for the BA Global Creative Industries, and I was the module lead for this module. I'm not anymore, but I set it up at the University of Leeds.
I'd love to hear more about this module. It sounds like you've managed to build some really interesting partnerships as part of this approach. How did you go about creating, those really diverse, purposeful connections?
Yeah, okay, so the module's called Creative Enterprise, and when we say that, we mean that enterprise is community as well as industry. So it's not just focused on business, although the curriculum is business analytical skills. That's basically what we're trying to impart to the students, but we focus very much on community needs and applying those skills to whatever our partners need. And that's, as I'll tell you in a minute, that's quite a range of different things. We have, depending on student numbers, we have 5 or 6 partners each year, and the students will form groups of 5 or 6 to work with those partners. We found that in the analytical phases particularly, having 4 students is not quite enough because there's so much to cover in what could be important. And the students come in blind, so they really don't have a clue. So we make sure that there's plenty of students there to cover all the different bases of what we're teaching them. The module works on a consultancy model. So I went out and found a whole bunch of partners who had problems, and we asked them to set a problem for the students, and they get to choose the problem. I encourage them to make that, as much as they possibly can, a real problem that is actually something that they would benefit from having solved. That's really important, that it's not just some made up hypothetical thing that, the whole sector has this problem, so let's make it that. It has to be specific to the organisation, and it has to be something that they are grappling with. And that's the first level of filtering I put on the problem. Apart from that, they get to choose whatever it is. And the problems have ranged from a theatre that wants to reduce its carbon footprint to an advertising agency that wants to balance its internal talent with its subcontracted talent to work with it. What else have we had? We had a one-person agency that works with the mental health of the children who've been adopted and uses arts and cultural things to assist them. They basically wanted to know how to make their business sustainable. And on that particular occasion, it was very pleasing that a year later, I asked them if they wanted to be involved the next year, and they said, "I can't, sorry, I'm too busy." So chalk one up to the students there. It worked really well. So as you can see, there's all sorts of marketing. There's a lot of marketing problems in the creative sector, particularly in the not-for-profit creative sector. That, lots of organisations want help with how can we reach the people we're trying to work with and help. So there's an awful lot of that. But it's quite a diverse range of interesting problems. And the students, of course, the first thing they have to do is to analyse that problem. And one of the first things I tell them is the first rule of consultancy is that your client often doesn't actually know what their problem is. They know what it looks like, and they know how they think and feel about it. But sometimes the problem is deeper, or it's a different problem, and the students have to pull that apart and really get to know the organisation and get to know the problem intimately and deeply before they can start talking about solutions. And so hopefully that sets that out. In terms of setting up the partnership, so I came to the UK in 2022 to take on this role, and that year was the first year that this module had been rolled out. Because it was a brand new program, it was just into its second year, and they hired me specifically to be the program lead for it because I'd done lots of experiential learning things at QUT, and I had a background in working with industry, giving students real experiences. And that was very much what this whole program is designed for. So I didn't know anyone when I arrived, and the first thing I did when I looked at this module and went, okay, how am I going to make this work, was I went to the creative sector industry meetings and festivals and things like that. Unfortunately, at that stage, Leeds City Council was supporting, Creative Skills Festival, it was called, and it was lots and lots of people from all across the creative sector, community and industry in Leeds who came to this thing. And I basically walked around and looked at as many different organisations and met as many people as I could and said, look, I want to do this thing. Are you interested in helping? Some of them said yes. And some of them said maybe, and some of them just looked at me funny and basically said no. But then, of course, there's the art of the follow-up. So then, not knowing anybody, I have to email them, get all their contact information. Fortunately, one of them gave me a book as part of their goodie bag materials. They gave me a diary, and I wrote down lots of contact information and took lots of cards. Go back and follow up and basically ask those people, this is what I'm after. This is how I think this might work. Does that work for you? And, then sent them the business problem brief if they were happy to be involved. So in that first year, we got 5 partners, and then it's about building that partnership each year. So I'll tell you more about how we get the partners into the classroom, which is very beneficial. But basically then it's managing that and making sure you maintain contact, ask them. Each year we do this, I ask the partners for feedback on how they felt about it, how useful they felt the students were, how they felt about the interaction, and we have tweaked the model based on that feedback. I'm hoping to write a paper on that at some stage whenever I get time to write a paper. I deliberately every year get their feedback and find out how the partners are thinking and feeling about it, and was this actually helpful for you, and build that relationship. That's very important.
That's really interesting, because one thing that I hear from quite a lot of universities is that balance between giving a really great student experience, but not having those kind of transactional relationships between students and civic partners. And, maybe tell us a bit more about how you've kind of had that longer term relationship with your partners.
Okay, so we've just finished the 3rd year. This one up ahead will be the 4th year that we've done this. We haven't had any partner for 3 years. I have a database now of about 15 partners that we've had over the years, and about another 10 or a dozen who have said, yes, I'm interested, but the timing hasn't been right. So the first thing there is you've got to be responsive to the partner's availability and the partner's needs. Partners will come, partners will go. If you've got enough partnerships and enough good relationships, then each year you will get the 5 or 6 that you need. And this year our intake for this program's gone up. So next year we're going to need even more. And with one eye on that, it's very much about managing that. It is, I'll come back to the win-win theme in a minute, but you can't use and abuse. And we have an organisation at Leeds called the Cultural Institute, which manages the cultural sector relationships for the university, and they're very big on that. It's great to want to collect data from the sector, but you can't just turn up with a clipboard survey and demand people's time without giving something back, which is one of the reasons why I tried to make sure that the problem that is set for the students is a real problem, so they actually do receive benefit from this. And the feedback on that's been very positive. We have a couple of examples of where the solution has been immediately implemented. They thought it was so good that it was great. We've had a couple where the partners have said, look, we couldn't actually use the solution because it wasn't feasible for these reasons that the students wouldn't have known. But just the fact that the students had challenged our way of thinking about the problem has caused us to rethink. So the wins can be subtle, and the wins don't have to be, oh, we found this student and they came up with a solution that was so good that we hired them when they graduated. That would be great. It hasn't happened yet. We've had a couple of students who've done some summer work for a partner, but that's not the point. It's about little wins and little supportive things that build over the iterations.
Yeah. It's about real life, isn't it? Real life is not that story that you wrap up with a little bow at the end. Real life is that interaction between a community partner and a student that in some way, that ripple effect has huge impacts on their life. So the student can go into an interview and talk about their experience and get a job in another organisation, and that community partner has analysed an issue in a way that they would never have been able to before. That to me is a huge win, but it's really interesting that that's a harder sell to a senior leadership, isn't it? So talk to me about, how do you sell that to organisations, the partner organisations and your institution? How do you sell that ripple effect?
Well, I was very fortunate that the institution totally embraced what I wanted to do. They pretty much hired me to do the model that I pitched to them, when they hired me. So they've been very supportive. And as long as the risk things have been managed and the learning outcomes have been managed, they've been very supportive, and it's wonderful. It really is great to be in that situation. I realise that a lot of people watching this won't be in that situation, and they will be fighting with their school. But my school has been wonderfully supportive, because this was the philosophy that the whole program is designed to support. In terms of the students, they learn so much through this process that has nothing to do with the learning outcomes.
Yeah.
They learn about professional behaviours in the workplace. They learn about professional communication standards. They learn about teamwork, because the first couple of assignments are all teamwork. And part of the curriculum is how to manage your teamwork and manage your time and allocate tasks and all those responsibility things. And I've had feedback from students who graduated who said it was so wonderful that we learnt that, because I was able to talk about that in interviews. In applying for jobs and things. So a lot of those soft skills are built into this, even though they're not written into the learning outcomes. They're
Yeah.
built into the learning, the components and the formative things. And then again, it's about making sure that the students do treat the partners professionally and expecting that the partners will treat the students as though they are consultants that they're paying for, even though they're students. So, and again, I've been blessed with that so far. We've had wonderful partnerships that have supported that.
Mhm.
We're slowly diversifying. We're very conscious that a lot of the partners we've had have been very music industry focused, because I'm a musician and the current module leader is also a musician. So it's easy to skew things in that direction. And it's taking a conscious effort for us to diversify into the other creative industries and the other cultural sector parts of what students could do to give them opportunities that they might be interested in. That's a challenge. What else? So there's a lot of clarity in the business partner brief. So when I created that, I was very specific about how to set the problem out and what sort of resources the students would need. And there's always an issue around commercial confidentiality and so on. But as much as possible, I try to get the partner to give the students materials that they're not going to find with an internet search, and they're not going to find in the grey industry literature about the sector. Yes, that's important, but I try to get them to provide the students with some, organizational charts that might be internal, or annual reports for not-for-profits and things like that, that may not intuitively come to the students as a good source of information and data, qualitative and quantitative. But try to build that into the brief that the students are given. And then, of course, that helps them with the analysis, because they've met the personality of the organization. They get a flavor for the vision and the goals and all of those things that are not just about the numbers and the outcomes. They're about the culture of the organization and how it thinks about itself and how the people view their roles, which can be very, very informative when you're trying to solve problems for an organization.
And while we're talking about the practical side of things, can you walk us through assessment? Because I'm quite curious to know how assessment works in this module, and how that assessment criteria might connect back to the learning outcomes you've set and the needs of those community partners.
Okay, yep. So we have 3 main forms of assessment. The first one is that the students form a group. They take the brief and they go and apply the business analytical tools that we give them, which includes pestles and SWOTs and all those basic standard tools. We give them those, and then we ask them to go and find as much information as they can about the organization and deeply analyze the problem. So the first assignment is, what do we think is the problem? Does it meet the client's vision? Does the client understand what the problem is? And that's both a summative assessment and it's also a formative assessment, because we invite them to give that report as a presentation back to the client, and they do that as a group. They then go away as a group and come up with a solution, and then they pitch that formatively back to the partner. So that's a formative, formal pitch as a group. Then the final piece of assessment is where each individual within the group writes their own report. And in that one, they talk about their particular role and their particular piece of the puzzle of solving the problem. And then they talk about solutions for what the problem might be. So there's 3 major pieces of the assessment. Those speak directly to the formal learning outcomes. So we have got business analysis and so on written into those, and they get to demonstrate their skills in doing that. They demonstrate their communication skills through their pitching and their writing, and they get to demonstrate all those soft skills we talked about before: professional communication, teamwork, time management, role management, making sure that within the team there's no role that's neglected because we're all interested in marketing and we want to solve the marketing problem. Someone has to do all those other things. And the thing I always say to students at that point is, okay, you're in this situation and you have a choice. You can either focus on the areas that you want to specialize in and try to build your skills and build your experiences in that area that you think you want to pursue, or you can take on a challenge and extend yourself into a new area. And you can take on something that you're not so comfortable with. You can take on that challenge and see how that helps you to develop. And it's quite interesting watching the personalities of which students take which challenge. Every year it's quite unpredictable, really. It's wonderful to watch.
It's just seeing a totally different side of someone because of what's been presented.
Yeah.
Just staying with the students at this time, I'm just wondering, I know that people who are in similar positions thinking about setting up this kind of module, thinking of safeguarding, that's going to be your risk and how are you going to sell this to, like we've talked about, to senior leaders? Talk to me about your safeguarding. How do you keep your students safe whilst they're out doing this, professional work with all these different individuals? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, that's a concern that should always be at the forefront of thinking. I have a three-part strategy in place for that. The first one is that I very carefully vet the partners and I make sure I meet them all and I speak to them all directly. And again, we've been quite blessed that every partner we've had so far has just been absolutely wonderful. They've invested in the project, they've invested in the students, and they can see the returns on doing that. So we have been absolutely blessed. But I make sure that I meet them all, get to know the organisation myself before exposing the students, setting up that meeting. The second thing is every point of contact with the partner has to be a group thing. They're not under my auspices. There's no one-on-one interaction. So that reduces risk significantly. And part of our philosophy is that the demands on the partner have to be very light touch. Again, in respecting them, we ask them to come in and speak to the students at the start of the module so that the students get some advice and meet them before they choose which project they'd like to be involved in. They then turn up for the first pitch, which is assessed, and they turn up for the second pitch, which is not assessed, but in which they will give formal feedback. So there's only those 3 points of contact. They're all group work, and those 3 are all in classroom. So then we leave it open to the partners to invite the students to their workplace as a group, to meet the rest of the team, to see the working environment and all those wonderful things that come with that. But we make it quite clear that that's to be a one-off group fieldwork expedition. We don't want students wandering in all willy-nilly and meeting people and so on. And the third key plank to that strategy is to set very clear expectations on both sides. So that's given to the partners at the very beginning before they write the brief. It's written into the brief what the expectations of the outcomes are. So, the students don't go in there thinking, oh, I could get a job out of this. It's written into the brief that this work will be, adopted at the discretion of the partner. And that it may or may not be implemented, it may or may not be any use for a whole range of reasons, but that's very clearly written in there. And I also make it very clear to the partner that if you want to hire the students on any basis as a result, that needs to be done formally and carefully. And we don't want any ad hocery going on that puts students in perilous situations. So managing expectations is set out in that document, which is, it's called a brief, but in many ways it's an agreement between the university and the external partner.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So if someone's listening to this and thinking, that's absolutely fantastic, exactly what I want to do in my institution, I'd love to try something similar with my own students in my own context, what would be your top piece of advice for them to get started with something like this?
Top piece of advice. Okay. I think the key to all of this in terms of the student engagement is the direct contact with the partner. It can't be hypothetical. The partners can't be behind a glass window or at arm's length. The key is to get direct engagement. When I talk to prospective students about this module that they might do, they all get very excited at the idea that they'll be working with an industry partner. So that direct contact is really important. The next thing I would say, partly to facilitate that, is always look for win-wins. You cannot be exploitative. You cannot, ask partners to do things that exceed their capacity and so on. Be prepared for churn. Not everybody's going to be available every year to help you out. We had one organisation that was a single one-woman not-for-profit organisation. We've worked with partners that have international offices. That advertising agency has offices in New York and Tokyo and South Africa, as well as Leeds and London. So the organisations will all be different. So you need to try to find something that's a win-win that meets the partner's needs and gives them the benefit of having been involved. As I said, even if it's just that the students have challenged their way of thinking and made them reconsider. If they think that's beneficial, then you've got engagement on both sides.
It's like a true equitable partnership. That's what
Yeah,
that's a big
absolutely.
part of the work that we're doing, equitable partnerships and meeting in the middle. And I like that win-win. That's basically what the equitable partnership offers you, is a win-win on both sides. Yeah.
Yeah, and look, I'm blessed in that in the cultural industries, there's no shortage of community partners and industry partners that have needs. You know,
Mm.
that's very easy to find that part of it. Setting that out in a way that the students can assist with and will learn from is a little more tricky, but it's not hard to find organisations that need support and could help,
Mm.
benefit from that kind of organisation. And on that subject, the next thing I'd say is always keep the partner involvement light touch. Don't ask
Mm.
too much of them.
Mm.
We actually originally built into this that there was only 2 points of contact, and it was in response to partner feedback that we added the third one where they said we would have liked to have met the students in week one and been able to speak to them directly before they chose the project. So they actually asked for more involvement. And then if you're going to ask for that involvement, make sure that those expectations are clearly written in on both sides, the student side and the partner side. Manage those expectations very carefully. If you want the partners to turn up to that final pitch and give good feedback, that needs to be set out in the brief right at the very start and then carefully managed. You can't just sort of say to them 2 weeks before term, oh, that's great, we've got our 3 meetings locked in. You have to stay in touch and you have to manage that relationship and make sure that you're, because they're busy people who have clashing priorities and so on as well.
Mm.
So you can't expect them to be available 8 weeks into the future just because they said they would. You have to stay in touch, give them reports back and manage that relationship. And you've also got to manage expectations with the students because they're quite prone to getting very excited about what they're learning and how wonderful it is and how much it's going to help. And therefore, they think they're solving the world's problems. So you have to manage that relationship as well and
Yeah.
say, that's a wonderful idea, but keep in mind, this is where seminars and workshops are so wonderful. Keep in mind that it comes at a cost and the partner may not be able to meet that cost. So it might be a wonderful
Yeah.
solution that would be great. It's just not feasible for them for whatever reason. So you have to,
Mm.
so that, yeah, I would add that as some advice. Manage those
Mm.
expectations very carefully.
That's very wise advice. Very wise.
Thank you.
Just to follow up to that one, I think linking back to something you said earlier about what students can expect from this module. Thinking after the module, what happens then? So the students have completed this module. Does that make them more engaged citizens? Do they think about things differently? What does that look like? They've got a portfolio of work potentially to take forward with them. Have you noticed any kind of change that you've seen as a result of this module?
Yeah, well, there have been a couple of very concrete changes. Like I said, that Sea Glass Collective organisation got such benefit from it that they took on the students' advice, and next year they were too busy to rejoin us, which was annoying and pleasing at the same time. The organisation that wanted to reduce its carbon footprint, one of the students who was on their group went to Amsterdam and represented at a climate change conference over there. So there's all sorts of things come on, but I would say the most pleasing thing about it, wearing my bleeding heart teacher hat for a minute, the most wonderful thing is you do watch the students grow in confidence and they're not intimidated by external partners anymore. They're not frightened of the idea that, oh, when I finish, I've got to get a job and that means I've got to sit in front of these people. And, they have the confidence to know that. And I did get some feedback from one of our graduates who said the benefit of not only this module, but the benefit of that approach to teaching is that when they sat in that interview, 2 things. First of all, they had the portfolio of things that they could point to and say, we did this. And that's very important on any job application. But secondly, they had the confidence to know what to expect in the workplace because they had learned all those soft skills, the professional communication, professional dress standards and, presentation standards, all those things that they had experienced from the direct contact with the partner. That really helps them. And they grow in confidence, and they, particularly the ones that take on an extra role, I find I'm biased because that's what I try to get them to do. But particularly the ones that take on a role that challenges their own expectations and their own abilities, they grow in confidence. And we've had several students who at the end of that module have stepped up into summer internships and taken on roles at the union and taken on leadership roles within the school in representation and little things like that are probably not directly attributable to it because the students are on a growth journey anyway. But you can see the skills and development happening in them that lead them to the confidence to take on those new challenges and seek those new leadership roles.
Yeah.
And
I
it's
think
always...
I think that's it. This is the hard thing about measuring civic activity, isn't it? You can tell that story, but would it appear in a report somewhere? Or it's like in your heart that you've watched them grow and watched that impact, and like we've talked about that ripple effect then they go on and develop more and more and more. But it is each tiny step that they've experienced along the way. And part of that is this work that you have produced and built. So you've put so much effort into the development of it that it is so impactful, and it is. But I think it's super hard to measure that and explain that to somebody who maybe isn't existing in this world of civic activity.
Yeah, and particularly when it isn't written into the learning outcomes.
Yeah.
To me, it's a
Yeah.
bonus thing, because the learning outcomes for this are all about business analytics skills and communication skills and things like that. And confidence in the workplace isn't written into that, but it's there. It's demonstrated. And one of the things that we've paid some attention to without really resolving is, how can we build all that other extra cool stuff that's really important and you can see it? How can we build that into some kind of reward and recognition for the student? Because it's not assessed in their grades, it doesn't show up in their assignments, but you can see it, and it'd be nice to be able to bring that to be recognized.
Yeah. And they
Some
understand it formal recognition. So I think sometimes it's verbalizing it, isn't it? So that they can put it into words that, I have developed in this way that's not a part of that learning outcome. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, this particular module doesn't have a reflective component other than a little bit in that final assignment. But in third year, we do a lot of critical reflection on practice. And that's where you get a lot of that specific articulation of, at the start, I felt and thought like this, and then I had this experience and I learnt this, that, and the other. And at the end of it, I realized that, that stuff is just gold. It's so wonderful when the students can be there, but it's so hard to write into the curriculum.
Yeah.
Right into the learning outcomes, but you can see it and it's there. It's a beautiful thing to watch those young people growing in this way.
Yeah.
But we'll keep riffing on that one, and maybe one day we'll come up with a solution for how to do that.
Well, it sounds like an absolutely fantastic module. So thank you so much for telling us all about it and sharing all of your details with everyone. I'm sure this will be really helpful for others in a similar position looking to make a real difference to their students and their local communities.